Hey, did you know I study computer science? Computer science for games specifically? Yeah, I wouldn't blame you if you couldn't tell, because I've never really done much game dev stuff on my channel, but, well, I've been working on it in the background. The only reason I haven't really showed off much of what I made is, to be quite frank, on a uni course, basically everything you make is going to be a quick prototype thrown together in a couple months. And that would be cool and all if the prototypes were the kind of stuff I was actually proud of showing off, but I'm not gonna lie, that's been my biggest frustration with, I guess, the stuff that I've done at uni, is that it feels like you never get enough time to make any kind of polished product, anything that feels good and well made that you could be proud of afterwards. That's certainly not to say that I haven't learned a good amount. I've learned a lot about the inner workings of C++ and all that, and how to get renderers working and all that kind of thing, DirectX, Vulkan, etc. But by the same token, it's still true that you only get one group project per year, and my first year one was a shitty Unity platformer. My second year one was an also pretty shitty but slightly better Unity platformer. Our third year one was a pure C++ DirectX game, and that was supposed to be a bit more impressive. The idea being that was going to be a 2.5D platformer where you could spin the camera around to change the layout of the levels. When you flipped around, it was called flip-flop. But not only did we run into a decent amount of issues making the game that made it run a little slow and feel a little unpolished, but as well as that, a bunch of our artists just never showed up, and in the end we just had to use stock art for our game. So, cool. So this fourth and final year has been the first time I've actually made a group project I'd actually want to show you. Which is ironic, because the fourth year one, as you'd expect, is the hardest one. In this fourth year group project, you're essentially expected to start from scratch. Like, really, you just got an empty C++ project for the most part. In my particular case, we had the opportunity to work with the PS5 dev kits, and while it wasn't mandatory, we were heavily encouraged to do so. And so I made a PS5 game. Basically, the only starter code we had was an extremely simple renderer that had been made for us, but the game engine, we had to build that from scratch. As well as, just programming literally everything else. It's been a lot of work, but that being said, I definitely will admit I've liked it a lot more than my previous 3 group projects. Especially because I've actually always had a bit of a reverse relationship with, I guess, ease of use when it comes to a lot of game making options. Better way of putting it, because that's a bit vague. What I mean is that when you use a game engine, it does a lot of things for you, and that's supposed to make things easier, and generally it does. But sometimes I find that game engines kind of bite me back in the ass, because, someone else made the game engine. I didn't make it. And so I don't fully get exactly how it works on the inside. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. I don't know what I'm not supposed to do with it. And so a lot of the times when things go wrong and I'm using pre-made code from someone else or a game engine, while it should be easier to figure things out because I have less to do, I actually often find things harder to figure out because what's broken, I don't even know if it's what I did or what the game engine did. And so as a result, I feel like I've actually, ironically enough, done better in the worst conditions, because that means I'm building everything for the most part up myself from scratch. Since I made everything, even if it's more work and it's more complicated, I actually kind of know how everything works, and if something goes wrong, I have a much better intuition as to where the problem likely started. Of course, being a group project, it wasn't literally just me, although it was a pretty small group. It was only 3 of us. This time, no designers or artists from separate courses, it was just us 3 programmers. And for the most part, what I worked on in this game was making all the audio used in it, aside from the explosion sound effect. That is a stock sound effect, unfortunately. Listen, making a realistic explosion sound synthetically is not only a pain in the ass, but it's not even worth it because it probably won't sound better than a stock explosion sound. Anyway, yeah, aside from the explosion sound, all audio, all music, all that made by me. I also acted as the lead game designer, so for the most part, any sort of decisions in terms of what the game should play like and the philosophy of how it's made and blah 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 and how we want certain aspects of the game to play, that's all down to me. And other than that, I was mostly working on game logic, the audio system, not just making the music in the game, but also working with the audio managers and things like that. When it came down to the other 2 teammates, who I'm just not naming because, I'm not gonna fucking dox them. Okay, well, that's not what a dox is, but you get what my point is. One of them mostly focused on the graphic side of things, doing things like the shaders, the lighting, the shadows, etc. And one of them focused very heavily on UI design, getting things like the HUD working and all that kind of thing, menus, etc. So with all that said, say hello to Hovercraft. What do you mean you're already acquainted because the background footage has been playing this entire time? What do you mean I just explained the answer to my own question? So this is Hovercraft. Or Refraction. Listen. For basically this entire project, we didn't have a name for this, and Hovercraft was just the code name. Refraction's technically the official name of this, but that was a last-minute decision, and it's always going to be Hovercraft in my head. So honestly, for the rest of this video, I'm probably just going to keep calling it Hovercraft, because if I try calling it Refraction, I'm going to get it wrong. Either way, so as you can tell, it is a twin-stick arena PvP shooter. Unfortunately, only local multiplayer at the moment. We were looking into whether online play was actually going to be feasible before the deadline, but yeah, unfortunately not. Online play is pretty tough to do. But obviously, if we did have the time, we would have absolutely have done it. Either way, the base idea can be gotten pretty quickly here. Bumper cars with guns, so to speak. Honestly, yes, it is a very simple concept, sue me, but I think it works. And I want to talk a little bit about why I decided to make this game of all the games we could have made. You see, going into this final group project, after 3 group projects in a row of disappointment, I was a little beaten down. I mean, I still want to make my dream game and blah blah blah, but at the end of the day, a lot of my dream games are just the kind of thing that are way too ambitious to even try and get a prototype of by, you know, a reasonable deadline. And so I didn't really have anything I was super passionate about that I wanted to suggest. I was kind of expecting at first when we got grouped up that someone else would have an idea they were really big on and we'd just go with that. But kind of surprisingly, no one really had any ideas. And so I actually had to start thinking. Now, as I say, we did have the option to try and develop on something other than the PS5. However, one, we were heavily recommended to, since obviously it's an opportunity you don't get as often as being able to develop on PC or something like that. And 2, I kind of felt like I had to. While unfortunately developing this on the PS5 means that, except at the uni on the dev kits, we basically cannot ever play this game again, which does make me quite sad. It also meant that we could reuse code we'd already written the previous year when first learning about how to program on the PS5. And the reason why that was a big draw for me is although we would have the same for Vulkan code or DirectX code, well, we could reuse code that we'd already written in previous modules. I'm not gonna lie, the DirectX and Vulkan stuff was kind of a bit of a mess. Like, it worked, but man, I did not want to go back in there and try and sort everything out. Whereas I thought the PlayStation code that we ended up having was honestly pretty clean in comparison. As a result, it might sound like a stupid and very tiny thing, but the idea of going back and having to figure out and clean up that Vulkan or DirectX code was just hellish to me. So that basically locked in that we were going to be developing on the PS5s. And for that reason, I wanted to develop something that I could only have really developed on the PS5. Well, you know what I mean. Of course, you could make any game on anything, blah blah blah, but what I mean is, a game that would really make the most sense on console rather than PC. You see, I've always had a little bit of a strange obsession with the differences between controller and keyboard and mouse. Most people simply leave it at keyboard and mouse is better because you aim better in most games, and yep, that's basically true. But I feel like it's kind of understated how much more insanely comfortable a controller is to use compared to a keyboard and mouse in just about every context. The only problem is that it's kind of just comfort, it seems at first. It really doesn't seem at first like there are that many advantages that a controller has over keyboard and mouse, especially if you're playing a 3D game. However, I think there's one that gets massively overlooked a lot, because you can kind of work around it, but that's not to say it ever really goes away as a problem. While I generally made the jump from console to PC controls pretty easily, one thing that still to this day nags me when I play games like Overwatch is the fact that I am locked to 4 directions when it comes to WASD. Now thankfully that can be somewhat remedied based off the fact that it's 4 directions relative to the direction you're facing, so you can get more fine control in which way you move by of course moving the direction you're looking before trying to press WAS or D. That being said, that doesn't really fix the problem, it's just kind of a bit of a clumsy workaround. At the end of the day, when it comes to smooth omnidirectional movement while also having smooth omnidirectional camera movement, the only real way you can get that is 2 sticks on a controller. And that is, aside from the comfort of it, the one thing that I still really missed from being able to play on controller is the fact that WASD feels so stiff in comparison to just being able to use the stick to move around. So essentially, I took what I learned that I liked, or what I learned works and doesn't work from games like Overwatch, and I decided, hey, what if I try and take this same sort of idea of a pretty fun, pretty ability-based, wacky, shooter. Unfortunately, couldn't really do the team-based because that would mean massive lobbies with loads of players. But, other than that, try and take a lot of the spirit of games like that, but then try to convert it into a game that's more console-friendly. A game that actually makes most sense to be played on controller. And straight away, the problem is obvious. There's a good reason why controller is generally worse than mouse for a lot of shooter games, and that is because, while it makes sense to move the camera with the right stick, you don't have a whole lot of ability to move the camera much faster or much slower using the right stick, whereas you have a lot of ability to control that with a mouse. And so restricting the gameplay to just 2 planes rather than 3, even if the graphics are 3D, well, that makes things a lot easier. Now we can just use the direction you point in using the right stick to aim, and that way you get pretty good aiming that works pretty fast in just about any direction, where you can just snap and turn around any direction you need. Obviously, that doesn't mean we haven't lost anything. Obviously, losing that 3rd dimension means that aiming loses a lot of depth, but I didn't see that too much as a problem because overall, I've never been super invested in it, ironically enough, in shooters that put loads of emphasis on aim. A lot of the shooters that I've enjoyed more are honestly the ones that blur the lines on what the definition of a shooter is by having a lot less emphasis on aim skill, and having aim just be a sort of incidental thing that factors into a lot of abilities in the game, but really a lot of it is down to more specific things, movement-based abilities, blah blah blah, knowing how things interact, ability management, so on and so forth. I mean, the parallels with Overwatch are obvious, but I mean, even Evolve, I'm a massive fan of Evolve, and that game, while aiming is still a thing in that game, I mean, you're trying to go after a gigantic monster. Unless you're playing a character like Val, overall, aim isn't a massive concern in Evolve, but team play and awareness and ability usage is. This may sound like a weird way to phrase it, but the reason why I still am attracted to a lot of these shooter games, despite the fact I say I'm not invested in the aiming, is because I feel aiming is at its best when it's just something incidental to do, just so something isn't quote-unquote free. I generally don't super like playing games where you have to land extremely difficult shots all the time to get success, but I do enjoy strategic games where having to do anything means passing some kind of aim-based skill check. It might sound really weird to say that, but essentially the reason I like it is because it feels like pseudo-randomness, but not actually random. It is based on your skill. As much as we like games to be completely fair, if you ever play a strategy game with 0 randomness, it won't be long before you've figured out exactly how to beat it every time, and it gets boring. So most strategy games employ randomness, but true randomness can be frustrating, because if you get unlucky and you get screwed over in your strategy game, not because you did something wrong, but because you got dealt a shit hand in whatever randomness came your way, that feels terrible. Whereas in an FPS, if you are constantly having to pass some kind of aim check every single time you do practically anything in the game, but that aim check isn't necessarily hard, then you're going to pass most of them. But every now and then you will mess up, and it'll be almost like randomness. Except it won't feel bad like true randomness, because at the end of the day you'll know, if you really didn't want to fuck up that one thing, if that one thing screwing you over really ruined your day, then, well, it's kind of your fault for missing the shot. You always could have focused a bit more and tried a bit harder. So I know this is a bit of a weird tangent, but it is just something that I think is important to understanding why I want to make this game. I want to make aiming kind of feel like that in this game, where it is important to aim to some extent, but it doesn't feel like the aim skill involved is extremely punishing and high standards, especially considering that probably wouldn't feel too great when, again, it is a twin-stick shooter, where, yes, you can still aim, but aiming is definitely going to be a little bit less precise, especially at longer ranges. It's going to be really frustrating if you have to land dead-on extremely accurate shots all the time, if the reason you miss is because your turret was rotated to 273 degrees instead of 274 degrees. You know, once it gets to that kind of nitty-gritty angle difference making the difference between landing or missing a shot, and you're trying to make up for that with your tiny finger movements on a little stick, that could get really annoying real fast. With all that said, this is the thought that went into the idea of making this game a twin-stick shooter. But straight away, I was trying to picture in my head, well, what could make this seem really, really boring? Because, I mean, it was a bland idea to start from. Just a twin-stick shooter where two players pop into an arena and shoot at each other. And so I had to think to myself, okay, what's the problem with this then? Why does it just intuitively feel in my head when I picture two people just moving around an arena, shooting in their general direction at each other? Why do I picture that as a problem? Because I had a feeling it was a little more than just the fact we hadn't added the spice yet, you know, all the abilities. Even if you had crazy abilities in a twin-stick shooter PvP game like this, as it is in our heads right now, maybe this would still be kind of boring. Well, the issue I saw was simple, and it was something that I kind of hated to admit, because when it comes to programming, this word does kind of haunt me. That being said, there's a big reason why so many games are heavily based around it: physics. Essentially, when you think of a lot of twin-stick shooters, a lot of them adopt a very rigid movement model, where it's literally just you press in a direction and you move in a set speed in that direction. When you let go, you stop moving in that direction. And that's all there really is to it. You press forward and you move forward at the maximum possible speed you could ever move forward, and you let go and you instantly grind to a halt. This is a big problem if I want this to be a PvP twin-stick shooter. Because how in the fuck are either of you ever going to land a shot on each other if you can move in any direction you want at the drop of a hat? If you can just mash left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, you can't really ever predict each other's movements. Not to mention the bullets would have to have travel time, which gives people more than enough time to get out of the way. We have to figure out some way that it's actually feasible to make people shoot each other in this game. And so that was what inspired me to make it hovercraft specifically. I like the idea that what you were controlling was something heavy, something a little bit slippery, not quite ice physics, but almost. You actually build up speed and you keep moving forward even when you let go of the stick. You slide around a bit, but at the same time you don't instantly shoot to maximum speed when you press a direction. This at first might just seem like an innocuous choice, just a different way of moving around the map, but for a game like this, it's critically important. Because what doing this to the physics means is that now you can actually guess where someone's gonna be in a second and actually shoot at them and expect the shot to maybe hit them. Whereas before, with how long the bullets would take to travel to each other, and you just being able to move in any direction you want at any time with absolutely no restrictions, you could easily just sidestep every bullet if you were actually paying attention. If you want another way to think of it, think of a bullet hell game. Because of the fact that in most bullet hell games you just start and stop with your movement and you have a tiny hitbox and you have so much time to avoid the bullets, even though there's thousands of bullets on screen, it's obviously well within your abilities to just dodge every single one. Well, I doubt it would feel very fun being the enemy CPUs in a bullet hell game, so to speak, shooting bullets all over the screen and watching not a single one of them connect because the guy you're shooting at just keeps sidestepping them all. But now we turn the physics on. Well, now if someone decides to build up a bit too much speed in one direction, you can shoot in that direction and they can't just snap their neck around and move the other way. They're screwed. They're going into those bullets. And maybe they could have avoided that if they didn't build up so much speed, but also you're kind of going to need that speed to get around the map and chase each other and go for attacks on each other. You can't exactly approach each other super slowly and expect to get the hit on each other. Still though, I didn't want you to feel punished for trying to move fast, even though there was already an element of risk-reward here, so that's obviously where the dash comes in. Pretty simple dash. Every few seconds, you can just completely ignore your current momentum and send yourself launching in a different direction of your choice. But it has a cooldown. So essentially this is your main method to dodge attacks, but of course you can still be caught off guard if you are relying on it too heavily. If you are moving around too often at too high a speed and eventually you get caught out moving in a direction you don't want to be moving, you can't keep bailing yourself out with a dash continuously. It essentially just exists to correct mistakes, so to speak, every now and then, so long as you don't make too many of them. The dash essentially helps us get a nice happy medium between complete ice physics bullshit rage and complete perfect traction, always move in this direction, you're never going to hit me. As well as that, I thought that physics were important for this game because, well, once again, comparing to Overwatch, I mentioned before that there are plenty of non-aim based characters I appreciate in Overwatch, and one of the biggest things that usually gets me to appreciate those characters is movement mechanics. I definitely have a big soft spot for movement mechanics, especially more so than aim mechanics. I mean, hell, my most played tank is still Ball for the moment, so yeah. I really have an appreciation for putting heavy movement mechanics into an FPS, or in this case, a PvP twin-stick shooter. And so these physics were going to be important because I would want playstyles to emerge in this game which involve knowledge of movement mechanics that would involve movement skill. And again, if we go for this rigid set speed movement, while it makes for good controls and in terms of going where you want to, when you want to. It doesn't exactly make for interesting movement mechanics or anything like that. So yeah, as much as I dreaded giving in to having to do physics and as a result having to do collision and as a result damning myself to hours upon hours upon hours upon hours of inexplicable bugs and phasing through walls, I mean, I can't lie, clearly it kind of paid off in the end. I mean, the physics definitely are the highlight of this game. Not to mention, I guess I'm kind of just throwing this in here, but I don't know what else to say yet. I do think there is something unique about this game. Don't get me wrong, I keep comparing it to other games, but the reason why I keep comparing it to Overwatch, although that might seem a bit strange because Overwatch is, you know, an actual team-based FPS, and this game is, well, again, a twin-stick shooter, is because when you think twin-stick shooter, you probably think of one or two things. You either think super arcadey single-player games like my favorite, the absolute classic from 2007, I Made a Game with Zombies in it, the absolute king of the Xbox 360 arcade. Or you think games that are more like roguelikes like Enter the Gungeon. I don't know, I don't really see PvP twin-stick shooters. In fact, for our course, we had to seek out competitions, similar games to compare ourselves to, and I could barely find anything on Steam that was really like our game. I mean, we could find plenty of twin-stick shooters, plenty of games with similar mechanics, but actual player versus player twin-stick shooters, not like roguelikes or co-op games or single-player games. There was only like 2 that we found, and one of them had like 3 reviews, and the other one was like moderate success, kind of niche, but I mean, clearly at least some people were playing it. And I think the reason why, as normal as it seems, this is kind of a rare kind of game, is because of the fact that a lot of this is kind of born from taking twin-stick shooter mechanics and then trying to say, okay, how can we turn this into something that feels a bit more like a competitive FPS? We know it's never really going to be a competitive FPS, but how can we take as many of the engaging things from this and put it into this? That was definitely a big motivating factor with this game.